I have received a letter from the honourable member for Greenway proposing that a definite matter of public importance be submitted to the House for discussion, namely the government's broken promises on the NBN. I call upon those honourable members to approve of the proposed discussion to rise in their places, and I call the member for Greenway.
Mr Speaker, Paul Keating nailed it when it comes to this Prime Minister. He nailed it in 2 words: no judgment.
That's right.
No judgment. This Prime Minister has not only declared in this place what the High Court would decide on citizenship only a short time ago, which didn't turn out too well. We saw his repeated refusals to instigate a royal commission to the banks and then see his backflip. But, Mr Speaker, Australians feel the impact of this Prime Minister's lack of judgment every day when it comes to his second-rate NBN. Because, Mr Speaker, Australian consumers and businesses are bearing the brunt of his lack of judgment, its impact on their everyday lives, its impact on their ability to conduct their businesses, its impact on their children's ability to get an education, to actually participate in the digital economy. And I tell you this, Mr Speaker, whenever you hear this Prime Minister bang on about engineering and economics, there's one bit of advice: evacuate the scene, just run, because you know that the poor judgment of this Prime Minister has led to the situation we have today of Australia dropping even further in the international rankings for digital capability. And you only have to see this Prime Minister's performance only minutes ago, where he tried to weasel out of the very real fact that he has failed to deliver on his 2013 election promise to give every Australian access to minimum speeds on the NBN by the end of 2016. Well, we're nearly through 2017. We're nearing the first-year anniversary of that broken promise. He promised faster, sooner, more affordable NBN under his tenure. He has broken every one of those promises. He promised it would be delivered for $29 billion. That's blown out to $50 billion. We see complaints now reaching 159% increases under this Prime Minister and his second-rate NBN. And I tell you what, the Prime Minister tried to tell us in some of his answers here today that NBN users are satisfied. They repeatedly say 85% of NBN users are satisfied. Well, I've got news for him, Mr Speaker, that would fail every pub test in this country. You would not get that past a single pub in this country. So what we have seen is the combination of broken promises and bad judgment of this Prime Minister, but few instances encapsulate it more neatly than the debacle of HFC in the multi-technology mess he has created. You just have to look at yesterday's question. Yesterday he answered a question about HFC, and he said there are obviously always issues with these technologies, talking about HFC. Well, that's not what he said before. Not what he said before. Just have a look. March 2015, the Prime Minister said this: "What our approach will enable us to do is deliver on our word, which is to deliver very fast broadband, in this case at extraordinary speeds, fibre equivalent speeds, much sooner, much cheaper and at much lower cost to customers." That's what he said HFC would do. And he also said on the 24th of August 2015, there are massive savings in time and money to be made by incorporating the HFC networks. Wrong. He said on the 13th of March 2015, the use of HFC networks could save the company 4 years to complete the project and around $30 billion in costs. Well, wrong on every count, Mr Deputy Speaker. Even after he broke his 2013 election promise, the Prime Minister promised that 2.6 million premises would have access to the NBN over HFC by the end of 2016. But only 160,000 premises had access by that time, just 7% of his target. The cost of the HFC technology is blown out by 45%. The Prime Minister still won't release HFC cost estimates from his original NBN policy document. And in October this year, the Communications Minister said the government's second-rate NBN would be, and I quote, the envy of the world. Well, I don't know what parallel universe that world is in, but it certainly isn't the one that Australians are living in today. And come the 27th of November, just last week, the NBN announced they'll be delaying the HFC rollout by 6 to 9 months because the network was not delivering a reliable service. So 2 million homes and businesses across Australia impacted by this latest delay, including over 40,000 premises in Bennelong being made to wait further. Now, it's the Australian taxpayer who is being punished for these latest failures. Now, the government says it doesn't know how much this will cost taxpayers, but previous analysis signed off by the NBN Co board indicates it could be anywhere between $420 and $790 million if there's a 6 to 9 month delay. Now, just imagine that. $500 million just thrown down the drain because this Prime Minister couldn't be bothered to take the time to make sure the HFC network was fit for purpose before it was rolled out. Bad judgment, Mr Deputy Speaker, and it's costing taxpayers, for this instance alone, $500 million. And to add insult to injury, this Prime Minister promised a new level of transparency in the NBN. But have a look at this spin. This spin would put Shane Warne to shame. This is the media release from NBN Co announcing that 6 to 9 month delay. I kid you not, this is the heading. NBN Co takes customer experience improvement program to new levels. Well, I don't know what new level that is when the NBN Co boss Bill Morrow actually broke the bad news, saying effective immediately, we will delay new activations over the HFC network and delay the rollout until we can adjust a number of issues on the network. So a 6 to 9 month delay is apparently a new level of customer experience. Well, it sure is. It sure is. It's just not a high one. It's just not a high one, Mr Deputy Speaker. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, you know, you can see that this government, they're pretty worried about this Bennelong by-election, and they should be. They should be worried. They should be worried because, look, their candidate, John Alexander, he's a nice bloke. Oh, I don't mind him. He's a good tennis player. We got elected at the same time. I got nothing personally against him. But the sad reality is this. He's been in Parliament, well, he was in Parliament, for 7 years. And guess how many times he mentioned the NBN in Parliament? Just have a guess. A rough number. 8 times. And even then, it was not a single piece of advocacy for his electorate. It was simply mentioning the word. Not a single piece of advocacy on this issue. But to be fair, he hasn't had a lot to work with. He hasn't had a lot to work with, Mr Deputy Speaker. But the message is quite clear. The message is quite clear from this government that they simply do not care about the customer. This was supposed to be the year of the customer, according to the Communications Minister. Well, the year's only got a few days left, and customers have been completely and utterly forgotten by this government when it comes to the NBN. So it's quite clear. If the good residents of Bennelong, if they're satisfied that $500 million is set to be lost, $500 million of taxpayers' money is set to be lost because of the poor judgment of this Prime Minister, then by all means, please, vote for the Turnbull government. If they're satisfied and if they're not bothered by the fact that this government has broken every single promise it has made on the NBN, by all means, vote Liberal. But if you actually aspire, if you live in Bennelong and actually aspire to have broadband treated as an essential public utility, as something that is as integral as sewerage, as electricity, as water, then please consider this. Consider the fact that this government has failed to deliver on their promise to you. They have failed in every single aspect when it comes to their promises and this project. So if you want to be able to watch Netflix without having the buffering, if you want a first-rate NBN, if you consider that Australia's place in the global digital economy relies on the highest quality connectivity, if you consider that the internet is important for your small business, it's important for your children, it's important for your family, then there is only one way that you can vote in this by-election in Bennelong, and that's for Labor.
I call the Minister for Urban Infrastructure.
Well, thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Shadow Minister has told us that she is concerned about the risk to expenditure of the consequence of the recent HFC decision by NBN. She is about as credible a fiscal hawk as the member for Sydney, who claimed to be concerned about the cost of the same-sex marriage survey. The member for Sydney, of course, has spent her entire parliamentary career carefully and diligently watching taxpayers' money like a hawk. She doesn't want a cent spent that doesn't need to be spent, and so too, apparently, the member for Greenway has suddenly become a fiscal hawk, determined to not see one taxpayer's cent spent which doesn't need to be spent. She did gloss over the inconvenient fact. That the Turnbull government's NBN strategy is motivated by a range of factors, including rolling out the network more quickly, which it is demonstrably doing, and also saving $30 billion compared to the cost of the hopeless and incoherent plan that we inherited from the disorganised rabble on the other side of this House when they skulked out of office in 2013. Let's have a look, Mr Deputy Speaker, at the record of delivery we have seen on the National Broadband Network from the Coalition. Let's look at what was in the business plan that was released after we came to government and what was delivered. So the business plan said that by June 30, 2015, there'd be 1,093,000 premises passed by the NBN. The actual number, 1,165,000. So we beat the target on June 30, 2015. June 30, 2016, the business plan said that the network would pass 2,632,000 premises. The actual number passed 2,893,000. Again, 2016, we beat the target. June 30, 2017, the business plan said that there'd be 5,442,000 premises passed. In fact, the actual number was 5,713,000. Again, 3 years in a row, we beat the target, which is a stark contrast to what happened when Labor was in charge of this project, when year after year after year they missed the target, not just by a bit, but dismally. Dismally. By contrast, the Coalition has been delivering. And you can see the incredulity of Labor. They're just puzzled. They just don't quite understand why it would be that NBN would say, we are concerned about service levels on the HFC, so we are going to pause activations while we fix it. Because this whole idea of saying there is an issue, we want to make sure customers are getting the service we've committed to, so we are going to pause and fix it. We are going to stop and be totally transparent about what we do. You could not find something that was more diametrically opposed to Labor's values, because Labor's values are all about the spin, the promise, and they don't care about delivery. They have no experience in delivery. They have no capability in delivery. Do you know, Mr Deputy Speaker, it's instructive to go and look at Service Class 0. These are premises which are planned to be serviced by fibre but are not yet serviceable. And there's a number that are at Service Class 0 right now, as there have been for quite a period of time. And that's inevitable as you roll out a network. But it's instructive to look at the numbers, because at the end of 2016, that number was at 2.8%. At the end of 2014, it was 17%. So we've been bringing it down. It's gone up a little bit recently because of HFC, and we'll work on it and we'll get it down. But you know, it's very instructive to look at the percentage that was Service Class 0 in 2013 when we came to government, because it wasn't 2.8%, it wasn't 17%, it was 31%. And why did that happen? Because Labor were desperately trying to present the best story they could, given their abjectly poor performance, and they were determined to roll out as many premises as possible without caring whether you could actually deliver and what the customer experience is. We are focused on the customer experience, so focused that when there is an issue which is absolutely capable of resolution, as the company has made perfectly plain, then we pause and we make sure we fix the issue so people get the service standards that they expect. And you could not think of an approach which is more puzzling to Labor, which is more at odds with Labor, who just love the press release, love the announcement, they just don't care about the detailed work of delivery, and frankly, they haven't got the skills and capability. And the proof of that, frankly, is not in the rhetoric. Proof of that is in the numbers. And let me remind the House of what I was pleased to share with the House a little earlier during question time, when we compare Labor's actual versus plan. In 2011, actual 10,500 versus a plan they claimed they were going to do 223,000. It didn't improve by the time they got to June 30, 2013. The plan said, Labor's plan, developed by Labor, under a Labor government, what they told the world in 2010 they were going to do in 2013. They said they'd have the network passing 1,700,000 premises. What they actually passed, 283,000. That is a hopeless performance. So it's no surprise that even objective sources or sources that are not certainly necessarily barrackers for the coalition, such as ABC Fact Check, present an interesting description here. Because what is it that the ABC News had to say in an item headed Federal Election NBN Promises Past and Present in 2016? In 2009, Mr Rudd promised the NBN would be finished in 8 years. Instead, just 154,000 people could access the service when he left office in 2013. This is what the ABC said. Not consistently, it must be said, barrackers for the coalition, but this is what they said. When Labor was removed from office, the NBN was running well behind its original schedule and was struggling to meet targets. That's Labor's track record. So the Shadow Minister has the temerity to come in here and talk about broken promises on the NBN. She needs to look in the mirror, because the broken promises have come from the Labor Party on the NBN, and it is quite instructive if you go and look at some of the things, the entirely inaccurate things that the Shadow Minister has said publicly. For example, in an interview on ABC's Late Line on 24th of October this year, she was admittedly under a bit of pressure, under a bit of questioning, actually a very good question. And she said, when she was talking about the amount of funding that Labor had committed, quotes, "We always had peak funding of 45 billion, close quotes." That was her claim, totally at odds with the facts. Totally at odds with the facts. In Labor's NBN corporate plan of 2011-2013, they committed to $35.9 billion in capital expenditure and peak government equity at $28 billion. So when the Shadow Minister says publicly we always had peak funding of $45 billion, that is just factually wrong. But it's not surprising she's making factually incorrect statements when you look at how dismal their record is. Which brings me to an important question, Mr Deputy Speaker, a question which is one of those abiding mysteries. You could search for the answer to this question for a long time, and that question is, what is Labor's plan for the NBN? What is Labor actually going to do? We've heard the Shadow Minister telling us indignantly how much she disagrees with what we're doing with the HFC. Shadow Minister works hard to give the impression that if it was up to her, you wouldn't be using the HFC. Now, that's quite interesting when you look at Labor's 2016 election policy document on NBN, which says as follows: under Labor, the rollout of HFC will continue. Under Labor, the rollout of HFC will continue. It seems that the Shadow Minister has forgotten about that particular election promise in 2016, as she furiously gives the impression that Labor would do something different. But on that same interview in October, she was asked by ABC interviewer Emma Alberici, so if Labor wins the next election, what is your intention? Do you go back to an all-fibre network? And I must say the Shadow Minister's obfuscation, backsliding and general evasion was world-class. World-class. She said, "It's always been our preference for fibre and to have fibre as deep as possible into the network, Emma. But after being pressed for a little while, there's nothing we would want more than to have as much fibre as is possible." And then, finally, she essentially admits that they're making no commitments, no promises at all. Our commitment is that we want to see fibre expanded as far as possible. But, Emma, the reality is this: we need to be informed by the state of the network as it is in the event that we are elected at the next election, ... In fact, what she goes on to say is Bill Shorten has made it very clear we're not in the business of ripping up copper. So despite the indignation from the Shadow Minister, there is no plan from Labor. There is no plan from Labor. They've got no alternative. but they do have a track record. And so when the people of Bennelong and the people of Australia look at the choice before them when it comes to the NBN, it's a very stark choice. The Coalition's consistent record of delivery and of rollout, and look at what Labor achieved when they were in government. They achieved very, very little, a dismal record, and they certainly don't have any plan at all. The choice is very clear. The Coalition is delivering the NBN.
I call the member for Lyons.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And what a risible performance from a risible minister. Now, he talks about the track record of delivery of the Coalition government on the NBN. Well, there has been no delivery that is worth speaking of other than wrecking a national infrastructure project that was visionary in its concept and which was well on its way to servicing this country in the way this country needed for the future. Well on its way. It started from nothing. You build nothing. All you can do is wreck. All you do is wreck. Labor builds, Liberals wreck. Labor builds, Liberals wreck. Look at the history of delivery. Labor created Medicare. Labor brought in the age pension. Labor brought in the minimum wage. So don't sit there, Minister. Don't sit there and tell us Labor has no history of delivery. It is Labor that builds the great programs that this country depends on. Now,
Order. The Minister.
In October 2016, the Prime Minister hailed the Coalition's NBN as one of the greatest corporate turnarounds in Australia's history. What an absolute joke. It was one of the great infrastructure betrayals that this country has ever seen, turning a great infrastructure project that would have delivered fibre to the premises to 93% of Australians, and he absolutely wrecked it with his multi-technology mix. A visionary Labor project that would have looked after the future of economics in this country, education in this country, healthcare in this country, and even the lifestyles of people in the home to watch things like Netflix and streaming services and enjoying modern services in the home. And all of it's been put at risk by a Coalition second-rate NBN. For the vision of the original NBN to be realised, it requires speed and it requires bandwidth. And these are not things that this government can deliver with their second-rate NBN. And nothing illustrates better, Mr Deputy Speaker, the way this government has treated the NBN than the fact that they actually bought 15 million metres of copper wire. In the 21st century, with the rest of the world going to fibre to the premises using super-fast optic fibre, this government allowed the NBN to go out and purchase 15 million metres of 20th century copper, which is a fraction of the speed for data upload and download. An absolute joke. Now, let's talk about what the experts have to say. The Minister sits there and stands there and says, oh, the NBN under the Coalition is working so well. Let's look at what the experts have to say. Professor Rodney Tucker of Melbourne University. He calls the Coalition's NBN an extremely costly disaster. In his paper, The Tragedy of Australia's National Broadband Network, he concludes this situation is nothing short of a national tragedy. Associate Professor Mark Gregory of RMIT says the economic case is nonsense from the outset for the Coalition's second-rate NBN, and, quote, it's the largest single waste of public funds in Australia's history.
Shame.
Internet Australia CEO Annie Hurley says they've turned a vision into a quagmire. FTTN, fibre to the node, is an obsolete technology, yet it continues to be rolled out. We are going to have to come around and do it all again, she says, and that is the tragedy. And that is the tragedy. They have turned a vision into a quagmire, and that is the epitaph that will be on this Prime Minister's gravestone. In my electorate of Lyons, I did a little bit of research and thought, well, what do the constituents have to say? And flooded with comments from people wanting to have their say in this speech today. In Westbury, in my electorate, 25 jobs were in jeopardy at an engineering company. They'd bought land to build a new workshop, and they informed Telstra and the NBN of their intention well ahead of time. They build their workshop. NBN Co says after the workshop is built, that connection could take between 1 and 2 years, as it's a greenfield site. 25 jobs at risk. Luckily, my office, Margaret in my office, is an absolute gun. She swung into gear and she convinced NBN of the importance of prioritising this connection. One of only scores of examples I've got here of people in my electorate, businesses in my electorate, who are suffering under this second-rate NBN. This country deserves better.
I call the member for Banks.
Well, thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, Deputy Speaker, the NBN is perhaps the single greatest failure of the previous Labor government in economic policy, Deputy Speaker. It was an extraordinary act of economic vandalism, the way this project was proposed. And to understand that, we have to go back to the genesis of the NBN, Deputy Speaker, because you'll recall back in 2009, the NBN was conceived on a napkin, Deputy Speaker. The project to build a national broadband network was conceived without any financial analysis, with a conversation between the then Prime Minister, Mr Rudd, and the Communications Minister, Senator Conroy, flying between different cities, brief conversations, and decided to build a national broadband network. And initially, Deputy Speaker, they said that the government investment would be $4.7 billion. Now, there's a problem with that, Deputy Speaker. The problem, Deputy Speaker, is that the actual cost of the NBN, as proposed by Labor, is at least $73 billion. At least $73 billion. And indeed, the most recent analysis conducted in 2015 said that the cost of the full rollout of Labor's plan would actually be $74 to $84 billion. So 73 is actually the low end of Labor's cost of doing this project. So just an extraordinary thing to do, Deputy Speaker, to say we're going to build an NBN, it's going to cost $4.7 billion. It's actually going to cost at least $73 billion. And just think about what that means, the absolute economic vandalism of those opposites. And they also lack operational skills, as the Minister stated before. People without experience of running operations, of actually doing things, Deputy Speaker. And as a consequence, when they left government in 2013, 97% of households didn't have access to the NBN, 3% did. That's a very small percentage, Deputy Speaker. 97% didn't, 3% did. They'd spent about $6 billion by that stage, bearing in mind that the whole investment initially was going to be $4.7 billion because the private sector was supposed to come along and make this huge investment in this wonderful investment opportunity. Those opposite didn't do the maths, they didn't do the numbers, they don't understand these sorts of calculations, Deputy Speaker, and they said $4.7 billion, that'll be it, the private sector will come along and look after the rest. That didn't happen, and the actual cost of this project, Deputy Speaker, as they concede, well over $70 billion. So this is a really important point that must never be lost, Deputy Speaker. And we saw so many examples as they set out to build under the NBN, Labor NBN model. A Tasmanian bowls club cost more than $86,000 to connect to the NBN. One bowls club, Deputy Speaker, not a whole fleet of them, Deputy Speaker. And 4 homes and businesses in Ballarat, not 400, not 4,000, cost $150,000. So that works out about $37,500 each, which is kind of a lot, Deputy Speaker. So a complete lack of understanding of how to do things operationally. And Australia is a better country than that, Deputy Speaker, because we need governments that actually plan things properly, that do the homework, do the hard yards and invest for the country. And that is what we are doing, Deputy Speaker, with 6.8 premises already crossed by the NBN, 3.2 million active. Project will be completed within a few more years, but at a much lower cost to taxpayers. And those opposite just kind of wave that away as if it doesn't matter. Well, it actually does. It actually does matter. It actually does matter if you're going to spend tens of billions of dollars that you, A, say isn't necessary, or B, say that you're not going to spend, when in fact you know and the Australian people know that that is absolutely the case. It's not something that can ever be forgotten, Deputy Speaker. But the failure on infrastructure by Labor is, of course, something that we see a lot of. We're seeing a lot of it in Sydney. I'm from Sydney, Deputy Speaker, and there's a lot of failure in infrastructure from the Labor government in that great state, Deputy Speaker. The Parramatta to Chatswood rail link, Deputy Speaker, and so important to the voters in Bennelong, was promised by Labor in 1998. It was going to be delivered by 2006. It wasn't. The North West rail link was promised in 1998. It was supposed to be delivered by 2010. It wasn't. The West Metro was promised in 2009. It was supposed to be delivered, and it wasn't. The North West rail link, Deputy Speaker, was supposed to be completed by 2017. Didn't, of course, happen as envisaged, Deputy Speaker. Failure by those opposite in the NBN and in infrastructure more generally.
Member's time has expired. I call the member for Werriwa.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The electorate of Werriwa and the suburbs like West Hoxton, Middleton Grange, Long Point, Prestons and Casula have been waiting for a decent internet connection for over a decade. First residents in Werriwa were told that you can't have ADSL because you live too far from the exchange or there aren't any ports left. Then they were told that Telstra was holding off on upgrades to the local area because of the impending rollout of the NBN. Then they were told that the NBN was finally coming soon to their homes, but now, in November 2017, they discover that they will be waiting at least another 6 to 9 months. I'm beginning to wonder if those opposite just assume that slow commutes and lousy internet speeds in south-western Sydney makes us a really patient people. If that is the case, I'm more than happy to dispel that illusion. A number of my constituents in Hinchinbrook have recently been moved over to the HFC. They've not reported a positive experience at all. A forum I held earlier this year in nearby Greenway Park was over capacity, primarily as a result of people wanting to voice their issues with their new connections. The complaints range from poor internet speeds to a lack of information and clear instructions for back-to-base alarms, medical alarms and landline-only services. One constituent in particular, Mr Johnny Multari, has been trying for 5 months to have the issues with his HFC connection rectified. Mr Multari had an internet connection over the existing Telstra cable network, the same network that the NBN uses for its HFC, and was advised that his service quality would improve after switching over. He was disappointed, to say the least, when he discovered his speeds were substantially slower, particularly in the peak after switching to HFC. He reported the issue and was paid many visits by NBN technicians, who each time would examine the line in his premises, confirm that it was a network issue caused by upstream congestion. The technicians also confirmed to him he wasn't the only household affected in the area and that they would make NBN aware of the issue. Each time Mr Multari's issues having been reported to the NBN, nothing else would happen, as the NBN would mark the issue as resolved and state that the issue was with his service provider and not the network. His sheer frustration with the whole situation was so great, he said he'd rather be reconnected to the older Telstra cable connection until that network switchover date, because he would at least have time to find somewhere else to live that had a decent internet connection. That is not a reasonable decision for anyone in Australia to have to make. And it isn't just technicians that have been acknowledging the issues with the HFC network for some time. Even providers are aware of the issues. Another of my constituents in Hinchinbrook was recently advised that he was now able to switch over to the new HFC connection. When he asked his service provider Telstra about service quality and what he could expect, he was told his current internet speeds were the best he would get, and when he went over to the HFC it would be a slower connection. How has it taken so long for anyone to acknowledge that the HFC network was a disaster for most households for the start? I would have thought it was common sense that before inflicting such technology, you would check it actually delivers and improves service quality. The reality is we're seeing yet again that the Liberals' NBN for what it is, a cheap second-rate combination of old technologies cobbled together in a way that not only fails to improve speed for many households but makes the speed slower. For those other constituents who've waited for any internet, they now must wait longer. I've spoken about residents of Long Point in this place before. who probably feel that they've already served their time, have originally been promised HFC connections back in February, but continue to wait for any connection, and now for another 9 months. The minister said in October that the NBN would be the envy of the world. Unfortunately, the corner of that world that my electorate occupies would not agree with that statement, and it seems that the 160% rise in complaints to the Telecommunication Ombudsman in the last financial year share their frustration. The experience of Werriwa residents is simply not good enough. They deserve much better. Small business can't function, students can't do schoolwork, and pensioners are confused and concerned. The NBN rollout must be improved. Not to do so relegates my constituents to third-rate or fourth-rate services. I'm continuing to push for a better deal for residents in Werriwa.
I call the member for Grey.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. Mr Deputy Speaker, when we came to Parliament, when the coalition was elected in 2013, there were no premises in my electorate of Grey connected to the NBN. Work had started in Port Augusta, but it had ceased because the contractor had withdrawn from the contract. In fact, they'd gone broke. It was the same in Western Australia. The entire South Australian and Western Australian contractors had withdrawn, so it had ground to a halt even after very little activity. Every target had been missed nationally, except one, Mr Deputy Speaker. The NBN met one target under Labor, and that was employee numbers. There was plenty of employees in the NBN, but they weren't getting much done. The financial estimates were out by billions. The NBN had a board where no one on the board had any experience in running a telco. No wonder it was such a disaster. Just 51,000 people connected Australia-wide after 6 years of Labor government. And remember, the NBN was an electoral commitment from Kevin Rudd in 2007. So in 6 years, 51,000. Now, by comparison, Mr Deputy Speaker, the NBN connects over 40,000 a week. Over 40,000 a week. And in Grey, and I'd like to talk about Grey quite a bit here, the electorate I represent, 54,000 have been passed by either the fibre to the premises or fibre to the node technology. 20,000 are connected. 14,000 have wireless available. 3,800 are connected. 250 are connected. That's not correct. I've got a wrong number there, Mr Deputy Speaker. But the satellite is available to 14,000 and 2,200 have been connected. And in fact, 99% of Grey have the NBN available now, as of this day. Now, that underlines the commitment that the Prime Minister made when he was the Minister for Communications when we came to government in 2013, when he said we will concentrate on those areas of Australia that have the worst service first, that we will connect them up first because they need the help the worst. And Grey was certainly in that boat because we had no NBN connection across the whole electorate, and most of it was served by reasonably poor technology. Now, to come to the satellite service, in September we lifted the data limits for peak times by 50%. We doubled the data available in off-peak periods by 100%. We doubled it. And these figures underline just how much we have improved connectivity for those that live within rural Australia. My office, and normally federal members' offices attract complaints about things like communications. People quite rightly know that these are federal issues. My office is receiving on average around about 4 complaints a week now, and they are almost always concerning providers, not actually concerning the network at all, but people haven't rolled up on time to do their connection. I made an appointment and no one arrived, and they said they'd come back next week and they didn't. Those types of complaints. But about the technology itself, after an initial bit of a flurry, things have really settled down very well. And so I'm very pleased with our performance. I'm very pleased with the performance of the technologies that have been rolled out in grey, and that includes all of those technologies. Those people are accessing wireless and I'm not on wireless. In fact, my service is satellite, and I'm one of those 12,000, I must say, they haven't got around to connecting yet. I can't get myself home long enough to ring up to actually tell someone I'm there to be connected. At this stage, I'm still running on a mobile phone signal, something I need to address. One of my staff members, though, for instance, is connected to satellite and says she is quite able to watch movies during the week, quite able to access Netflix, and very, very happy with the service. And those people that are on wireless are telling me they have a very, very good service. We have a few towns left to connect up, including the one from which I come, Kimber, which was a late inclusion to the wireless network, and they'll be connected in 2018. But 99% of Grey have the NBN available. And that is a wonderful endorsement of those comments by the Prime Minister when he was the Minister, saying we will address those parts of Australia that have the worst service first. And I thank him and I thank this government for delivering on that commitment.
I call the member for Hindmarsh.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And Mr Deputy Speaker, can I just say that it's becoming a bit of a habit in this place where we rise on this side with great disappointment to talk about something that is not working again, or a broken promise, or a backflip. And here we are talking about the NBN, with yet another delay in rollouts of the NBN. And of course, Mr Deputy Speaker, the government rose to power promising a cheaper and better NBN. And we can go back to the 2013 election when we remember the now Prime Minister, the then opposition spokesman on communications, in the Sky Channel with all the holograms and all the spin, because it's exactly what it was, nothing but spin, promising a better NBN, a cheaper NBN. And Mr Deputy Speaker, I have to say that both of those promises have not come to fruition. We've seen absolute blowout in costs and an inferior system and network where it's actually slower than what people had previously. And these are the reports that I'm getting in my electorate. Delays of getting the NBN rolled out in their suburbs, and when it does get rolled out, it is actually slower and not as good as what they used to have. And this is a real problem. If you're working from home, if you're a student that wants to download to do your homework, or at university, this is a very big problem. And Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm sure my colleagues next to me and behind me, the member for Herbert and the member for Dobell and Macquarie, will have stories to tell about their electorates as well. And I get regular complaints from suburbs in my electorate such as Underdale, Flinders Park, Fulham Gardens, Mile End, Marsden, where bits and pieces of the NBN are being rolled out, and massive delays when it comes to ensuring that there's appointments that are kept, being able to adjust to the new system, ensuring that things like, for example, pensioners who have alarms for their own safety are basically knocked out and have nothing in place to be able to ensure that they need, when they're in an emergency, to be able to be connected. And these are things that are affecting not just my electorate but all around the country from what I hear from my other colleagues. And as I said, we've seen delays and an inferior NBN than what was proposed by the Labor government in 2013. Mr Deputy Speaker, if we fast forward today, as I said, we have a second-rate copper NBN that drops out, can't keep up with the demands and performs worse than many other countries around the world. Worse than many countries around the world. And it's only a Turnbull government who could waste billions of dollars and make the internet worse. If they had just listened to us in 2013, where we spoke about fibre to the node, to ensure that we would have the latest technology, the best technology and the best communication system, an absolute infrastructure benefit to this nation, we wouldn't be in this position today. And it's one thing to talk about the rollouts and how many houses are being done, but what's the point if they don't work? What's the point if we don't have fast downloads? What's the point if a kid can't do his homework and download information to put his homework in? What's the point if a university student can't download certain things from his university to be able to answer the questions? What is the point of having a fast rollout and getting it out and done, which we don't anyway? Deputy Speaker, as I said, Labor's plan for majority fibre network was a great opportunity for this nation, for a nation-building moment. A nation-building moment where we could be right up there with the latest technology. And it's great to hear the Prime Minister talk about internet connections and being the super nation when it comes to technologies, etc. But you've got to invest your money. You've got to be able to look at the latest technology and run with it, not go to an inferior technology and do it because of an ideological spite. That's what it was back in 2013 and 2016, an ideological spite, nothing else. They knew that the Labor plan and what we were proposing was a far better system. They knew that, but because of politics and spite, they decided to go against it. And Mr Deputy Speaker, you always have to look at the backbench over there and on the other side while their leaders try to sell Australia a dud system that is the NBN. And the complaints that I get in my electorate every single day via emails or whether it be through phone calls, the other side would be getting as well. The government side would be getting it as well. And you can see it when they're talking about the NBN. Deputy Speaker, we have slower speeds, we have dropouts, poor connections and a complete service failure, and it's left many pensioners in my electorate without phone.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. I'm really pleased to speak on this matter of public importance because while members opposite claim that the government has not delivered on its commitment to the NBN, the story in my electorate of Robertson on the Central Coast tells a very, very different story. I want to look at a real-world example of how we can deliver for people and businesses and how that delivery is done by a government, such as that has happened in my electorate. And it is clear when you look at that the only broken promises in my electorate are those made by Labor. So here are some of the facts. Under the Coalition, the NBN, formerly known as NBN Co, has hit every rollout target we've set since coming to government. Compare this to the previous Labor government's record. 3 years after the first premise was connected in 2010, the rollout was more than 2 years behind. So much so that by late 2013, only 51,000 premises were actually connected, barely 10% of the original 2010 target, so how can Labor be trusted? In contrast, under this government, we've got a network which is now available to 6 million premises and will be available to 11 million premises by 2020. When Labor left government, in contrast, barely 50,000 premises around the country were able to connect. In contrast again, the Coalition is connecting 35,000 premises a week. That's 35,000 a week against 50,000 in 6 long years. On the Central Coast, the record is even more stark. In my electorate of Robertson, the latest report shows that around 96% of the rollout is complete, of which 2/3 of premises have taken up an NBN service. That's more than 79,000 premises that are ready for service and more than 53,000 connected. And in some areas like East Gosford, Greenpoint, Kincumber, Yadalunga, Coolewong, Point Clare and Tasca, the take-up rate is more than 80%, which is outstanding. Yet under Labor's last mismanaged rollout, just over 200 premises in the Robertson electorate were connected to the NBN, despite promises that more than 7,300 homes and businesses could connect to it. Who could forget the sight of the former member for Robertson, Deborah O'Neill, pushing a great big button on the Gosford waterfront, claiming that our region was open for business thanks to the NBN. And yet, despite those claims, 90% of the homes and premises in and around Gosford were actually classified Service Class 0 or Service Class 1, meaning despite all of the fanfare and the press release, people couldn't actually connect. It took months and months of frustration and complaints to overcome the multiple challenges for thousands of homes and businesses that were unable to connect despite the promises made by Labor representatives on the Central Coast. Labor created this mess and it's taken the Coalition government to clean it up and get on with the job. We've recently announced the activation of a fixed wireless tower in Mangrove Mountain, which will connect residents to fast, affordable broadband. Fixed wireless serves 5% of Australians in rural areas, generally outside major towns. It also has the highest satisfaction rating on the NBN and offers speeds of up to 50 megabits per second download and 20 megabits per second upload. The Mangrove Mountain Tower will cover more than 170 premises, and I'm advised that nearly 20% of premises in central Mangrove and Peats Ridge have already connected in the few months that it's been active. NBN have advised that the Mangrove Mountain Tower will provide links to a second site at Colnura East, then onto a site at Bumble Hill. And this will provide the transmission link to other towers, including a site to the southwest at Mangrove Mountain and also to Wendouree Park and Spencer, which I'm assured are currently in the planning stages. This is great news, in particular for the communities of Spencer and Wendouree Park. During a public hearing of the Joint Standing Committee on the NBN on the Central Coast in August, we heard from local community advocates Belinda Repton and Robin Downham, who have been tireless campaigners on the issue of broadband and improving mobile phone connectivity and reliability. Robin described Spencer and Lower Hawkesbury River region as one of the last frontiers and pointed out that it's 1 hour's drive north of Sydney, but still they feel often isolated and neglected. Belinda said that of the 30 families, 21 of them are business owners who live in the valley and they rely on internet to conduct their business. So the community expressed frustration at some of the uncertainty around the rollout of the NBN, and they had legitimate concerns about the satellite rollout locally. NBN took this on board and assured residents that the fixed wireless solution would be put in place for them. This actually proves, Mr Deputy Speaker, that in contrast to what members opposite are claiming, the coalition government is not only delivering, but we are listening very carefully and meeting the needs of communities like Spencer. Deputy Speaker, it's very clear that the only broken promises in my electorate are those made by Labor during their last 6 long years in government.
I call the member for Herbert.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise in this place to say what an absolute mess the former Communications Minister and now Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull has made of the National Broadband Network. The Abbott-Turnbull government has made promise after promise to deliver a faster broadband network to all households. But as we are now coming to the end of 2017, with households still buffering and an endless string of broken promises, the Australian people have lost all faith in the Turnbull government and their NBN assurances. We heard Malcolm Turnbull promise that everyone would have access. We heard the Prime Minister promise that everyone would have access to the NBN by the end of 2016. By the end of 2016, over 7 million premises were still waiting for access to the NBN. We heard the Prime Minister promise his NBN would be faster and cheaper. Yet the reality is he is delivering a second-rate NBN that is slower and more expensive. We heard the Prime Minister promise he would deliver NBN for $29.5 billion. His multi-technology mess now costs nearly $50 billion. That is a blowout of $20 billion. On the 11th of October 2016, the Prime Minister hailed the Coalition's NBN as one of the greatest corporate turnarounds in Australia's history. If by great turnaround the Prime Minister means backflipping on every NBN promise made to the Australian people, falling short of every target and overseeing soaring complaints and halting the HFC rollout because it doesn't work, then yes, it truly is one of the most outstanding turnarounds in Australian history, but it clearly isn't something to be proud of. Mr Deputy Speaker, on Friday the 1st of December 2017, the Townsville Bulletin reported that the Vietnam Veterans Federation Townsville Inc. had no internet to communicate with clients or the Department of Veterans Affairs for over a week. Both their phone and internet lines were cut off without warning, and they were not able to provide services to their clients. The Vietnam Veterans Federation Secretary-Treasurer Chris Mills stated, "We can't function, we are doing things manually, but we cannot finalise anything." You can only imagine the increased stress this would have placed on the association itself, its volunteers, and not to mention our veterans. In the electorate of Herbert, we are the largest garrison city in the nation. It is simply unacceptable to have one of our prominent associations cut off without warning. Mr Deputy Speaker, my office receives reports from constituents regarding the NBN issues on a daily basis. Recently, I was contacted by a local small business that runs software development. The director of the business stated they were in a building where 80% of the tenants could connect to the NBN, yet the other 20 were left in the wind. This building, I might add, had been serviceable since March 2014. As a software development business, you can imagine the significant financial impact this would have on their business. Small businesses in my community are under enough pressure as it is at present. The failings of this government's NBN should not be an additional burden. Mr Deputy Speaker, this is simply not good enough for households and businesses in 2017. Our nation has become a laughingstock on this issue, and we are yet falling behind the rest of the world when we should be leading the world and the nation. Complaints data released by the Telecommunications Industry Ombudsman for the 2016-17 reported a 160% surge in NBN complaints. For the first time, the TIO complaints were outpacing the growth in the number of NBN services. Internet complaints are now also the highest source of complaints, surpassing mobile and landline. Australians are frustrated and deeply disappointed with their experience on the NBN. Under this government, it has become the norm to receive slow speeds, dropouts, unreliable services. Issues and complaints are being bucked past without accountability. Appointments with technicians being made only to find no one turns up. This government needs a complete reality check when it comes to the NBN. The appalling record is an incoherent mess. In 2013, the Prime Minister had no HFC in his NBN rollout plan. In 14, he had 3.2 million HFC premises. In 15, this increased to 4 million premises. In 16, this decreased to 2.8 million premises. In 17, this increased to 3.1 million. It begs the question, what will it be in 2018? Despite all of this, the government complains 85% of NBN users are satisfied. This only shows the complete disconnect that this government has with Australian people. I call on the Turnbull government to stop sitting on their hands and take action. Labor never planned on this second-rate form of NBN, so it is time to stop the blame game. You are responsible for this abysmal disaster. That is called the NBN,
Order.
and the current government is your responsibility.
I call the member for Gilmore.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. When a 24-hour period in politics is seen to be a long time, you can understand how 5 years has fogged the memories of the Labor Party. The NBN, a cardboard drinks coaster plan, developed in transit between two cities to establish a digital communication initiative for our nation. Talk about a tale of two cities. The NBN was begun without a proper business plan, without proper planning for infrastructure locations, without a rollout schedule. It was begun in pilot locations. Let me explain. One of these was Kiama. In the grandiose vision, the idea was to have underground fibre cable connected to every premise. What a joke. Labor today talks about slight delays to make sure the HFC is properly connected. The initial connection issues in Kiama, and these were legacy issues of the outgoing Labor Party, included the following. A change from underground connection, too much cost was incurred due to the location complications. Oops, Kiama is built on basalt, one of the hardest rocks to drill. 2, no planning to negotiate the use of existing power poles, so a second pole was put in place. Oops, lack of planning. 3, finally, although not the total end, the fibre reached the premise, but if there was more than one phone in the house, there was no connection device, let alone a duplex, and then complete confusion to connect aged care facilities with hundreds of connections needed. So let me remind those who sit in opposition, technology glitches are not new. Seems to me if you have 40,000 premises able to connect per week, there's likely to be a level of hassle that is a great deal more than when you're only connecting 50,000 premises per year. Labor promised the world to Australians connecting to the NBN, insisting that 100 megabits per second was the need for every household. But did it tell you about the cost? Did that ever get mentioned? No, so as usual, Labor tells us only part of the story, which to me is dishonesty by deceit. In Gilmore, if it's proposed that 92% of the homes will be able to connect to the NBN by the end of next year. My region, due to its complex geography, has a complete mix of technology: fibre to the premise, fibre to the node, fixed wireless towers and satellite connections. Now NBN has had to develop another form for regional areas where homes in small clusters are too far from the node and there is an insufficient number of homes to economically build another node. So we'll have fibre to the curb as well. Recently, the Minister said that the multi-mix technology is going to be absolutely the best one, and I agree. And as a result of taking the approach, the NBN will be completed by 2020, 6 to 8 years sooner than would have been under the case with the predecessors, that means the Labor Party, and it will also be completed about $30 billion less. I think that's a major asset. Labor promised 250,000 Australians they'd be eligible for interim satellite service, but only purchased enough capacity to service 48,000. Oops, bit of a problem there. They criticised the rollout, but they can't get their numbers right. The result was a debacle. Consumers experienced severe congestion at peak times with speeds similar or worse than dial-up. Typical Labor overpromising and under-delivering. We also had to fix this situation. Now more than 81,000 customers across regional and remote Australia receive faster, affordable and more reliable broadband. Labor claims the NBN would and should already have been delivered. The rate of connection delivery under Labor was dismal, with only a 20% of estimated connection for their target by June 2013. We've taken a tortoise-shell speed of rollout up to the speed of the rabbit, with more than 6.5 million homes now able to connect. Cheaper, fairer and affordable. That's the aim, and we're delivering.
I call the member for Barker. Sorry, the discussion is concluded. Now I call the member for Barker.
Thank you.